Welcome to the Rise with Anita podcast. I'm your host, Anita, and this is going to be my first solo episode. So, before we dive in, I really just thought this first episode would be a good way to lay in some groundwork of who I am, how I got into this space, and essentially how I'm going to help you, what I'm going to be talking about, that type of thing. So, to really kind of give you this framework, I'm not going to get into my full story today, but I'm going to take you back to 2020 because I do think that was where the most pivotal of the moments for myself was. And to kind of give you an idea, prior to 2020, I've mentioned this if you've actually followed me on Instagram. I'd love to connect, by the way. But if you follow me on my Instagram channel, I actually had a post where I was talking about how prior to 2020, there was a few times where I do recall actually telling my coworkers, like, I like helping people in insurance, sure, but ultimately, I don't think this is for me. I think that I want to be a life coach, which when you think about the industry as a whole, especially coming from a 9 to 5 background, it doesn't really mesh well. So it was very out there for me to even be thinking about this. But back then, I had kind of a lack of confidence in my abilities. I definitely was not where I wanted to be financially. I was not in a place where I was able to even do my own work. So I didn't really feel like, had I not been doing the work on myself, that I could go and help others. So fast forward to 2020, we all know what went down, so I'm not going to go into that. But I ended up having this whole kind of epiphany where I started to do the work. I started taking courses, started learning about inner child work, and I just kept reading. And really, it was this kind of awakening of like, wow, I really want to be in this space and I have a lot to share, especially when it comes to the abandonment wound, when it comes to inner child work. And I think what really makes me different is that I take that inner child, but my whole premise is a lot of times, whether or not you're doing what you love based off of something from childhood, there's usually a key component that gets often overlooked of something you love to do that's actually in line with your purpose. And I'm not saying that purpose is necessarily what you are doing for career. However, for me, this is definitely my aligned mission, but it is a part of who it is that you want to become, how you want to grow. So 2020 happens. I'm doing all this work. And really, I got to this point where I was burnt out. It was August 2020. I'm no longer able to go to the gym. I haven't seen some of my best friends at this point 4 or 5 months, um, maybe even a little more so. And I remember just hitting this like wall of like, I'm burnt out. I'm freaking tired. And at the time, I was working a corporate job and really hustling to get this like promotion that it was not working out, which we'll get into in a later point. But I remember just thinking, okay, I'm not one to take vacations. And prior to this, I was a person who maybe took 1 week off in an entire year. But I remember looking at my mom. I kept hearing the word Sedona, Arizona was coming up. And if you were in the spiritual space or if you were in the space of just people who were wanting freedom, they were going to Sedona. It's a very beautiful place, has so much of a high frequency, and I just kept seeing Sedona, Sedona, Sedona. So on a whim, I literally told my mom, hey, I want to go to Sedona for a couple of weeks. Can we maybe book a trip? And I'll be very honest, I was not in a financial trip position to take a trip that was going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I went ahead and booked us a 2-week stay in a area that was about 20 minutes out from Sedona called Cottonwood for a couple of $100. And we were literally booking it between the two, and just every single day being in that environment, being in that energy, and actually allowing myself to slow down, because Sedona itself was a slow paced place. And it's a vortex, so the energy is very high, and something about that trip really kept being like reaffirmation after reaffirmation of like, I need to be in this space. Why am I not in this space yet? And I remember taking this trip, and I did a couple of sessions with a hypnotherapist over there, and I also did a channeled massage at the Gateway Cottage Wellness Center. And I remember just getting this like reaffirmation of like, yes, you're meant to be a coach. Like, why are you in this insurance industry at all? And I was just like, okay. And ironically enough, on this specific trip, I was actually able to connect with those who I had not only been watching on YouTube or listening to their podcasts, but it was kind of like a reaffirmation. And ironically, it wasn't like I was seeking these people out. They happened to be in Sedona for various reasons, various launches. And I remember running into like Erin Dowdy at a Whole Foods, or Lauren Liz Love at also a Whole Foods, actually. And just being like, okay, there's this reaffirmation. And I don't know what it was about that vortex energy, but ironically, it was, I believe, in the Whole Foods parking lot, or maybe Avant's parking lot, where I remember I just got this tagline, which is now the tagline for my business of Arise, transform your pain into purpose. Because when you think about some of the things that we go through, whether you, like myself, have gone through maybe some abandonment issues, whether that's a parent not being there for you, or maybe for you, it was the case of self-abandonment. When you go through something like that, and eventually you come out to the other side, I think the whole purpose is for us to really get to the point where we share what we learn, and we share that to help others. So it became this like motion for me where it was just like, I need to be living more in line with my purpose. So I'm over here, I get this tagline, and all of a sudden it clicks. It's like Arise with Anita, because my whole thing at that point was just up leveling my life. So I get back from my Sedona trip, and by this time, I had booked my first UPW, Unleash the Power Within. For those of you who don't know, with Mr. Tony Robbins. It was going to be virtual, but I had a in-person ticket for whenever the world opened up again. And I remember I was making all these changes. I'm constantly reading. I'm constantly connecting with other women who are in the same space of trying to find their purpose, their mission, or they already kind of have an inkling towards what they are, but they're not yet there. And I remember all of a sudden I'm connecting with new people, and I'm excited because naturally when you're going through these shifts, you just want to share. So I remember telling a few of my friends like some of the changes I was going through. And, I would like to say that these people are still in my life today, but not all of them are. And we started butting heads over just, why does your mission have to be a part of your purpose? What's wrong with the 9-to-5 job? Which there absolutely isn't anything, but for me, I was running into this point of like, wow, everything I want is boxed in, and I'm not able to do it because I have this 9 to 5. And full transparency, I was at a point where I was just not in a place of starting a business at that point. So for me, I took the route of just learning as much as I could, reading, listening to the podcasts. And again, with 2020, the lockdowns, I was one of the few people who actually gained some of the weight I lost back. And it was because I was not able to move in the way that I was used to. So I'm a person who enjoys thoroughly hit cardio workouts, which I have learned is maybe not the best thing for a feminine person. Um, they can be a little intense depending on when you do it in your cycle. And I'm learning these things now, but back then it was not what was available to me. Let's put it this way. So, to kind of give you this key point and key takeaway about this podcast, what it's going to be is some of this is just going to be me sharing what I'm learning now. Because I remember feeling so isolated because at one point I'm trying to tell my friends, like, hey, there's this thing. Oh, you can do hypnotherapy, you can do meditations, and like, oh my God, breath work, like game changer. And they're looking at me like, girl, you have lost your freaking mind. And um, so it kind of also pivoted a dark night of the soul moment where you are connecting with new people, but they're not necessarily people you're able to meet face to face. And all of a sudden you're feeling like, oh my God, I have no one who gets me. Now, I am very, very lucky in the sense that I have a mom who's, hey ho, whatever you support, I'm going to do. Whatever you do, I'm going to support. But other than that, it was very like, what? And I remember getting a download, and I'm not quite there yet at my business, but it was also in Sedona. So I'm just going to share this here so it's recorded and documented. But I did get a download where one of the key things I want to teach is teenagers who maybe had parents who are separated, who have had an aspect of the abandonment wound. Maybe their parents, they had a parent who was not in their lives, helping them get through that phase of life and kind of kick off that healing journey for them so they don't have to wait till they're after their 20s or 22, 25 when the space comes for that. So I remember actually excitingly calling someone, a family member, and being like, dude, I found my purpose. Like, this is why I went through all this shit before. And again, I'm not going to get into the full details right now because I'm just kind of grasping at what actually kicked this whole thing off for me. But I was like, I found my purpose. I know exactly why I went through all this shit. And I'm here to help people, specifically like these teens and these kids, be that source of like a light. And then as I did my certification training, I learned that maybe working with teens and kids are a little outside of my comfort zone for the time being with what I know right now. However, I'm still in the process of finding a tool. Not that you can't coach children, but there's just intricacies that go with that. Finding more tools that will best serve them at that phase of life. So that is where I'm at with that. But that is definitely a big term picture of what I want to do. Anyways, so 2020, I'm in this like vortex, so to speak, because the world's shut down. I'm working from home full time, so I have this excess amount of time because I'm basically living in my leggings and my t-shirts. And so I'm just constantly reading, constantly listening to podcasts. And I remember the first time I did a UPW, 2021, we had this exercise. You break through a board. It's very, very intense, so to speak. It is actually for those of you who are familiar with the Tony Robbins world, usually day one is fire walk day. So right off the bat, you're out here outside walking on fire, walking on hot coals, which I got to experience last year and in 2021. But the first year, when everything was closed down, it was breaking through a board. And I remember having this moment of like, damn, like I have all these fears, all these worries that I don't know if they're even like why they're holding me back. So this is the phase we're in. I'm going through, and then by day 3, you do the Dickens process, which, as effective as it is literally kind of like hell, so to speak. I will leave that as is for privacy reasons, but it gets very intense. There's screaming, there's shouting, there's crying. And prior to the year 2020, I was not crying. I did not allow myself tears. I was very sheltered in the sense that I would not allow myself to feel emotions. And it was this experience of like, oh, it's safe to feel emotions. It is safe for me to actually communicate those emotions. And again, I'm going through this work, and family members, friends who don't necessarily understand are kind of like, okay, you're changing, but cool, as long as you maybe get happy. Or to some of them, it literally just led to fallout where I have not spoken to those family members in years, and that's totally okay. So I guess one thing I will note for those of you who are listening, who's maybe just starting their process of getting into maybe personal development, is it can feel very lonely. And honestly, there's community out there if you really seek it. But what I've found is sometimes that lonely period of time, while it's not comfortable, it's kind of what is necessary. So UPW, I kind of treated as my, so to speak, of like a New Year's. And that's where I actually planted my year goals for the next year. And the first one was I was going to go ahead and get certified as a coach. So I was going to find a certification program, sign up for it, and go on this trajectory. Because in order for me to feel comfortable coaching, it wasn't just based off of experience. I wanted to have that certified background so that anything you bring up, even if I haven't experienced, maybe I have a better understanding of how I can help you without necessarily having the full empathic diving into your world. Because I was actually realizing at this time that I am an empath. So I'm very sensitive, which kicked off the whole thing of like, oh, no wonder when you were bullied in school years ago, you were still holding on to these things, and you were so kind of like broken down by the world because you just wanted to be seen, heard, and just, let's be honest, loved, cared for. So realizing why it was taking me that point of like empathy and compassion, and really getting to this place of like, okay, I'm learning all this about myself. So this year, 2020's UPW was really kicking off the need to actually become a homeowner. And moving from California, which had all these political aspects that were not necessarily what was aligned with myself anymore. And at that point, my grandparents had bought in a house in Vegas. And I just wanted to be a little more free in the aspects of what I could do financially. So I was like, okay, big goal number one, I'm buying a home in Vegas next year. And at this time, I had no flipping clue how I was going to do it, but that was one. I wanted to get my mom and I into a house. Then I was going to also, um, I believe it was maybe go back to Sedona, which I have not done, but again, it was not something I prioritized. So let me just rephrase this. Sometimes we set these goals and then a shift happens and we just need to reprioritize. So going back to this point of time after I did the UPW, um, once the holidays were gone and passed and we were actually in 2021, I was diving deep into another course again. And so it was great. I'm keeping very focused on this vision board that I had for the year of moving out of the house, moving out of California into our first house. And I remember just being like, is this the right choice? Because I love the beach and I grew up in LA and I have family over there, but ultimately it was me starting to trust my intuition that it was time to leave. Sure enough, 2021 started off with a bit of a kick right in February as I was starting my transitions. And I got into my first major car accident. So I was T-boned. I'm not going to get into the full details. It was quite a painful experience. But what I really got out of that was, I guess, let me rewind for a quick sec. But when my car had flipped after being hit, I ended up basically being parallel right by another car who was this beautiful woman with her 2 or 3 children back of her car and her sister. And I ended up being parallel to them. So I actually did not hit them, but I was very close. And if you're watching the recording, you could actually see kind of my hand motion for that. If you're not, I was showing it. But so we're parallel. And I remember thinking, holy shit, what just happened? Because again, this was the first time I've had an accident where I was the driver. And then the secondary thought after that was just, I got out. I couldn't feel my legs for a quick sec, probably from the shock. And I looked over at how close I came to hitting this woman and her children. And I remember just being like, oh my God, thank you, gosh. Thank you, God. Thank you, angels, that I did not hit that car, because if I would have injured or hurt children, I don't think my soul at that time could have taken it. And so we go through this nasty battle. I'm not going to get into the details of how that accident went down. It has since been closed out. But I remember coming home, and the first few days are obviously daunting, especially when your car is totaled. And again, it's just a lot was going on in this specific time. And I remember there was a point where I was just like, wow, I am meant to be here still, because I've seen major car accidents. And on this particular street, it was one of those streets that were kind of like a hot spot. And I remember being like, I am meant to be here still, because I didn't pass. And the way that the car braked at the end of it was very smooth. And I knew there was something higher protecting me, which I do believe are my guardian angels and past ancestors. But you make with that however you wish or you believe. Maybe you'll think I'm nuts. Fine by me. But I remember just being like, why do I really have a purpose still? And so I started on this trajectory, and fast forward, you're out here working, you're still doing the development work, you're connecting with these beautiful souls who became like soul sisters. And I ended up connecting with these lovely, lovely ladies who, if you're listening, you know who you are. And actually, one of them is Melanie Maddie Soul. So, um, my co-host for the astrology readings just came out during this period of time, and things are starting to look up. And one thing I remember I was specifically manifesting at this point was a group of soul sisters because I just felt lost. So we are trudging through the year. There's action being taken, but it's like a process. And at this time, when we had decided, hey, we're gonna end up buying the house, my mom and I was in about $10,000 to $13,000 of debt, give or take. And so we made the goal, paid it off. I wish I could say it was just like an influx of manifestation there, but it was really just came down to kind of doing the hustle thing and hustling to go ahead and make this dream a reality. So I paid off the debt and I really going ahead and learning about saving for the first time in my life. And I was, April of that year, I ended up signing up for Martha Beck's Wayfinder coaching course, which I found out about also in Sedona. I'm telling you, that trip was magical. But prior to that, I had not heard of Martha Beck or her work. And I was just like, I've talked to the ICF. I cannot remember the other organization, but I've also talked to the life coach school, and these are a little out of budget. Let me go with Martha Beck, because she was also who was kind of like a key founder of the coaching industry, kind of in the way that Tony Robbins is. So I take Martha Beck's certification that fall, which began this whole thing because you're still doing the work as you're learning these principles. So, but prior to that, we actually started really anticipating the house move. And by, I believe it was May, June of 2021. And we ended up going ahead and really being like, okay, we're going to have it in this particular zip code because the houses are nicer. There's a bit more one stories, not necessarily entirely entire blocks of it, but there's more one story homes there. It's close to your grandparents' house, and it's kind of like the epicenter. So without giving away where I'm at, that's kind of the details of how that manifestation started to come to form. And I remember making consistent trips out to Vegas, making the consistent trips back and forth, and also starting to FaceTime, which if you bought a house in 2020 or 2021, a lot of people were going through this process of FaceTime showings prior to it. And hey, make me an offer before I can even get there, because at least I can back out on the way out. And so it was this learning journey of like saving money for the first time and how your brain has to make that shift. Because one thing I will go ahead and admit is there are a lot of aspects and things that I am generationally breaking that have not been done prior. And it's exciting, but it's also nerve-wracking because it's like creating a new path or creating a new pattern. And so here we are. We're trudging through, and it started to be May, June, July. We're constantly looking at homes. And there was one day my mother was out, and I got a text from our realtor. She was like, hey, you got to check this house. I'm here. And so I FaceTime her. And I'm like, oh, single story. It has a nice yard, considerably for Vegas. And you know what? I took it as a sign there was like a rosemary plant which happens to be one of my mother's favorite herbs, there was a big rosemary bush. Now, it was a wild rosemary plant for those of you who are interested or care, but it was a wild plant. And I just remember being like, that is my sign. This is the house. So we go ahead and put on an offer. Well, not we, I put an offer in on this place without my mother seeing it. And she was like, I don't really care. Whatever it is, we're going to, like, if you like it, let's just go for it. Because at this point, I am tired of living in an apartment. So I put an offer in on this place. Basically almost sight unseen for her, so to speak. And we did not actually see this place until we closed on it in September 2021, which was a process mostly because it was a probate house. And the way probate works here is a bit different than it does in California. But so we were waiting, and my God, I just remember like coming in as we booked and really taking in the house. Like, is this really the house that we're going to make into kind of a mini dream home? And it ended up being the place we stuck with. So there was a lot of lessons in just that home buying process, which I may do a separate podcast on. But I remember kind of walking in and just starting to visualize what it wanted to look like. The aesthetics, the curtains, the way we were going to be able to sit in our kitchen, or the way we were going to be able to sit in the living room, and finally having a house that had multiple bedrooms. So I'm able to have an office and just little things like this that really got me super stoked. So that was like the big cross off. And by that end of the year, when I went back to UPW number 2, well, actually, number 1 with the firewalk. By the end of the year, I remember looking at the vision board I had for that year and just being like, oh my God, I've checked everything off. I've almost checked everything off, and it was the best feeling. But I'm not going to lie to you. There was a lot of loneliness in this process. I still have not found a community in Vegas. Not saying that there isn't one, but it was a lot of growing in the last couple of years. And as I say this now, it ended up being one of those situations where until you reflect back, you may not realize how much you've gone through in a couple of years. So 2022 starts, and I think this is where we're going to kind of end off the video of me talking for right now. But 2022 starts, and we're excited to be moving into this house. We ended up renovating the house completely. So as of 2023, we were able to get the kitchen done. But prior to that, we did the floors, added lights because Vegas houses did not have lights in the ceilings. What else did we do? We did the floors. We did a little bit on the roof, out of necessity, obviously. We ended up painting the entire house. So it really was that aesthetic version of like what everything wants to come in. However, I'll be very candid to admit that the decisions that we made at that point were a little costly, and the money I had saved prior to actually buying the house ended up all going into the house and then some. So it was a learning curve for sure. And because we did have unexpected costs of just things that went wrong, most recently the mold in the kitchen and whatnot, I found myself in upwards of $40,000 of debt 2022. So I was basically overworking myself to tears. And 2022 was just kind of like a dark night of the soul for myself, where I'm in this debt. I'm constantly working overtime. I'm taking my life coaching course, but I can't fully uh, commit and show up. And I'm showing up to the classes, but I'm not able to commit to the coaching sessions as rapidly as I want to because I have this many hours of work I need to be hitting. And I remember just starting to burn out. And it was me really in this hustle and grind culture for up until last May. And then just kind of being in a state of stress and frustration, which became my emotional home, which is a phrase that Tony Robbins loves to teach on at UPW. So essentially, what happened though is I think because of how quickly I had manifested everything that I wanted, and if you've actually heard of Gay Hendrix's The Big Leap, that was the phase I was in. So I manifested all this amazing, amazing opportunities and growth and shifts in my life, but I hit my upper limit. So I don't think I fully ever really visualized what it would look like to be a homeowner at 26 and to actually have like a mini version of your dream house and to start aligning yourself with your purpose. So I found myself in this state of frustration and really starting to like, there was a lot of days of crying and anger and questioning my own choices. And now on the other side, I can definitely say that it was worth it. But it was a growing pain part for myself. And it bled with the relationships I had with my mother. And became this like avalanche of like really not knowing what it was that I needed, how to get out of that situation. So I did manifest, or we did manifest paying down the debts. So I'm no longer in high interest debt. Yay. Not that all debt is bad debt, but the debt I had accumulated was definitely bad debt. And so this whole thing is to kind of say, even as you're on your personal development journey, just be a little kinder with yourself. You can still find yourself facing new beliefs, facing new levels of your subconscious, which if you've ever been to the point where you've done some work on yourself and you find an old subconscious belief is resurfacing, which has happened to me now 2 to 3 times at least. And you're like, damn, I thought I worked on this. Or at least that used to be my mentality until I realized it's like peeling back an onion. It takes a minute as you're shedding through these layers. And when you're going ahead and hitting these new levels and new dreams, you're going to find new subconscious limiting beliefs. It's just kind of the way our brains work in terms of how we end up finding things happen. So, to wrap it up, at least for this episode, um, you got to know a bit about me, but some key takeaways from that 2 to 3 year period I just discussed was really, for me, it's okay to feel lonely. Not everyone has to understand you, and many times they won't. 2, it would be to go ahead and really trust your intuition, trust your guidance, trust what you're being led to. And three, just to have some compassion with yourself because, especially in 2022, I was lacking in compassion and lacking in where I thought I should have been. So at that point, I will be fully transparent. I was and still am working a corporate job. And I was just like, I should have quit by now. I'm working this many hours. I'm tired. I'm burned out. And, you know, there is nothing wrong with things taking time and your evolution taking time. And so much of what we see of this overnight success is not always something that is actually the truth. Because majority of the time, overnight success is actually foundational blocks of things being built incrementally until the success actually happens and it almost looks instantaneous. So just give yourself a little more grace. Have some compassion with yourself because as we're finding our purpose and our ways of being, our ways of connecting, you will find that you're actually on the right path. The right mentors, the right people are going to be revealed to you to guide you, to hold space for you. And so I really recommend having more of a sense of compassion, having more of a allowing yourself to be mentality. So this is where I'm going to end off. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please comment down below. I'd love to connect with you. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of going into these next few episodes of not only sharing my experiences, but also really sharing what I've been learning and sharing new tools and modalities and strategies. Like, I'm just so excited to be able to connect with you people, connect with others, and really just serve. I'm coming from a place of service, and I hope you can hear it in my heart. So I wish you a wonderful, wonderful week or weekend whenever you're watching this. And I'd love to have you subscribe. And if this resonates, please go ahead and maybe just connect with me in any sense. You can go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can go ahead and connect with me on Instagram at Arise with Anita. And I'd love to just see how this journey unfolds and share it with you. So, bye-bye.